Hi everyone, today we're going to go over hormonal control, diabetes type 1 and type 2. So here we have the pancreas, and it's located retroperitoneal between the duodenum and spleen, meaning behind the peritoneum. It has an exocrine function, which is for digestive enzymes. So digestive enzymes like lipase, amylase, phospholipase, and proteases. But can also secrete inhibitory enzymes like CCK, cholecystokinin, and secretin as well. Okay, and then it also has an endocrine function, and that just means a hormonal function. And these types of cells secrete hormones and are arranged in little nests called islets of Langerhans, like this over here. Okay. There are many different cell types. There are beta cells, alpha cells, D cells, gamma cells, enterochromaffin, and epsilon cells, all having a specific hormone. But the ones we're going to look at today are alpha cells and beta cells. Beta cells secrete insulin. Alpha cells secrete glucagon. Okay? Beta cells secrete insulin in times when blood sugar is high. Okay? So, for example, right after you've eaten a meal, and we call this hyperglycemia. Okay, you might be thinking, well, that's a good thing. Don't you want to have sugar in your blood? Well, no. Actually, we want to take that sugar in our bloodstream and take it to our muscles or fat tissues, okay? So that's the whole point. Insulin is able to basically open up channels of cells and take sugar from the blood into tissues. Now, there's alpha cells and they secrete glucagon. This is secreted in times when there's low blood sugar, okay, or hypoglycemia. And this is important because, for example, in a fasting state, so maybe you're sleeping or it's a long period between meals, that your tissues still have the ability to produce ATP, even if there is no direct source of carbohydrates or sugar, for example. This usually is in the form of the breakdown of glycogen in the liver and releasing those sugar molecules into the bloodstream. Okay, so let's say now that we've just had a meal and we have a lot of sugar in our system, right? It can be carbs, it can be proteins. So this is all running through our blood vessels. And what's going to happen is we're going to have the secretion of insulin. Insulin over here is going to bind to its insulin receptor, which has an alpha subunit and a beta subunit, okay? And when this binding happens, then GLUT channels will actually be translocated to the membrane. Okay, there's 4 types of GLUT receptors, all having a specific location, but all you need to know is that there's GLUT receptors and they are translocated to the membrane. Okay, and not only this, but they open, and so that sugar molecules, let's have some of the sugar molecules, they will go in and enter the cell. And then, of course, cellular respiration will happen and we can produce ATP. Here are some of the actions of insulin and glucagon. So when you're thinking about insulin, think about that it decreases lipolysis and proteolysis, right? That makes sense. Our body doesn't need to break down any of our muscles or fat because there's enough sugar already, okay? It also decreases gluconeolysis, which is the breakdown of our glucagon in the liver, and decreases gluconeogenesis. It increases glucose uptake, glycolysis, protein synthesis, and glycogen synthesis, right? This all makes sense. You want to extract the sugar from the blood, take it to the tissues, and then actually be able to use and assimilate that particular molecule. Then for glucagon, it will decrease appetite, decrease lipogenesis, which is the formation of fat, and decrease glucolysis. But at the same time, it can increase satiety, glucose production, and lipid breakdown, ketolysis, and proteolysis. Okay? Ketolysis is the breakdown of ketones. And your body produces ketones when it's at a prolonged fasting state, when there's no more glucose left in the body, that it will actually start to break down, for example, the fat in your body and the proteins in your body to use as an energy source. High yield is differentiating between diabetes type 1 and type 2. Diabetes type 1 is characterized by insulin deficiency and is an autoimmune disease, okay? That means that it can be caused by genetic factors like the mutation in the HLA genes or environmental triggers like diet, viruses, certain drugs, and stresses. All of these factors combined can lead to a breakdown of immune system self-tolerance, the pancreatic beta cells, but then also the generation of autoimmune attack on these beta cells by autoantibodies. This leads to the loss of beta cell mass and then to less than half of the original mass and therefore lowered secretion of insulin. And that's why you have an insulin deficiency. Okay, this is typically 5 to 10% of all diabetes cases and is most common in Northern Europe and the Middle East. It is diagnosed usually below the age of 30 years old, and the presentation, they are usually leaner. It's often that you may see more acute cases, ketoacidosis, right? Because there is such a buildup of ketones. And this actually presentation, when it's not properly treated, diabetes type 1, can be very, very serious. Both can be very, very serious, but because this is an autoimmune disease, you may see ketoacidosis, which may have irreversible damage on the body. And not only this, but you can also see that there is insulin deficiency. Of course, it's pretty straightforward. If you're missing insulin, the treatment would be insulin supplementation. Diabetes type 2 is characterized by insulin deficiency and resistance. Resistance is this idea that even if your body secretes insulin, it is not responsive to the hormone, and therefore the channels will not open. Okay? And that means that this insulin resistance is really contributed by metabolic syndrome and genetic susceptibility. Okay? Unhealthy lifestyle, aging, medications can also be causes. All of these factors lead to insulin resistance, and therefore you have adipose tissue, muscle, and the liver, which become less responsive to the insulin. And therefore, initially, the beta cells of the pancreas work overtime to increase insulin secretion, but then over many years, they actually tire out, and you have less insulin secretion. Okay? So in that sense, you not only have resistance, but a deficiency. And so therefore, it is not an autoimmune pathogenesis, okay? It has more to do with lifestyle, but also genetic, aging, and medication factors. It makes up about 90% of cases of diabetes, and it's highest in the Middle East and Pacific Islands. Individuals are usually diagnosed over the age of 30 years because, of course, as we know, obesity, hypertension, these are all factors which may also increase the risk of diabetes. Their weight is usually overweight. And as for clinical indications, you can usually see a partial insulin deficiency. You might also develop a condition called a hyperosmolar state. This is where blood sugar levels are very high for a long period of time. You can get symptoms of extreme thirst, frequent urination, and confusion. What's happening is this high or hyperosmolar blood with sodium, glucose, and other substances is drawing water out of the body's other organs and into the blood. And that also includes the brain. Okay? So this is a very acute situation that needs to be treated immediately. Treatment, it's usually managed through lifestyle, so exercise, good diet, a Mediterranean diet, for example. Metformin, if lifestyle is not enough, And of course, last resort is insulin. It's more complex than this, but this is the basic idea that it's mainly managed through lifestyle. What I want to talk about is metabolic syndrome. It's not part of the syllabus, but it's closely tied to diabetes type 2, and it's just really interesting. So you have to have at least 3 out of these 5 criteria to be diagnosed with metabolic syndrome or have some sort of metabolic syndrome. The first is hypertension, so increased blood pressure. Visceral obesity, it's usually around the abdominal area here. However, the legs will not seem to be any fatter. Lowered higher density lipoproteins, hypertriglyceridemia, and high fasting glucose, right? As we know, this can later be diagnosed as a diabetes. Well, the idea behind this is that actually these factors are kind of playing into one another, right? It's very uncommon that you just have one of these factors, because over time, let's say you have hypertriglyceridemia and low high density lipoproteins, what probably means you're at higher risk of hypertension, right? Because these will form plaques in the arteries and probably increase the pressure at which the blood moves through these arteries, right? So this is just a really good thing to keep in mind, that metabolic syndrome is really closely tied to diabetes type 2 and is often seen in combination with diabetes type 2. Hey guys, so this is the end of this video. We covered the secretion and the function of insulin and glucagon and the pathophysiology of diabetes mellitus. So please give this a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in next week's video.